I was 29 and broke when I landed a job in Leech. Texas is a small town where odd jobs off Craigslist were my only option to make ends meet. A man in a wrinkled suit offered me $300 cash to stay overnight with a body. His explanation was vague. It was tradition, and the body couldn't be left alone. I didn't ask questions. I just needed the money. He handed me the address of a small brick funeral home just outside town, set back behind a rusting iron gate in a dusty parking lot. I arrived just after sundown, carrying only a phone charger and an old paperback book. The man was waiting inside, next to the embalming room. Without much conversation, he pointed to a side room and handed me a ring of keys. "He's in there," he said. "Stay awake. Stay close. And if you hear knocking, don't open anything." Then he left through the back without explaining more. I was left stunned. The viewing room held just one chair, one floor lamp, and a closed casket centered under the dim light. There was no smell or chill, only an unnatural stillness that weighed on me. I sat down with my book, but every creak in the building had me jumping. Minutes crawled by like hours. At about 9:30 p.m., the overhead light flickered and dimmed slightly before steadying again. I looked up, then back at the casket. Nothing changed, but my skin prickled as if the atmosphere shifted. I tried to shake it off, but the silence was heavy. Around 10 p.m., I thought I heard soft knocking from behind the room, not the casket, but from somewhere in the wall. 3 dull thuds, then silence. I checked the door, looking around, but everything appeared normal. Yet that feeling of being watched settled deep in my gut. By 11 p.m., the knocking came back louder, this time from a corner where a small utility closet sat. I hadn't opened that door yet. The pattern was slow but rhythmic, almost like someone tapping out a code. I pressed my ear to the door and heard breathing. My heart hammered. I took a step back and checked the keys. The ring had one marked closet, but I wasn't touching it. Instead, I pulled the chair further from the door and focused on the casket. I tried telling myself it was pipes or mice, but my nerves were unraveling. At 11:45, something new. The casket shifted slightly, not open or cracked, just turned about an inch on its base. I hadn't heard movement. I stared at it for 5 solid minutes, waiting for a repeat. Nothing. I didn't sleep all night. By midnight, I paced slowly across the room, constantly glancing at the casket. The air thickened as if the room was shrinking around me. My breath echoed too loudly. The thermostat read 74 degrees, but cold goosebumps covered me. The metal on the casket had a faint fog, though I hadn't touched it or sat down. At exactly 12:17 a.m., I froze mid-step, heard a soft creak from the casket hinges. Just one, then silence. I stepped a few feet back, heart pounding, eyes fixed. The lid didn't open, nothing moved, but I didn't dare blink. I decided I needed fresh air and walked toward the hallway that led to the break room and restroom. The viewing door was cracked open behind me. The hallway felt wrong too warm, with a faint scent of iron and dust. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. Only the red glow of an exit sign lit the carpet ahead. Frozen, I debated returning to the room when a dragging sound scraped across the carpet behind me, long and slow. I turned sharply. Nothing. The casket room door was still open and the lamp lit. No sign of movement or anyone else, but I could feel the presence behind me in my spine. I walked backward, eyes on the door, and locked it. I refused to open anything anymore. My heart thudded as I sensed something had changed. I checked the casket. It was shut, but the lamp next to it dimmed further as if the bulb was dying. The shadows in the corners stretched longer. I could feel eyes on me. Minutes later, I heard breathing again inside the room. It was faint but steady, like someone asleep. The casket lid remained closed. I stepped back, the space feeling unbalanced now. I stood behind the chair, unsure whether to flee or stay. Then the breathing stopped, replaced by something worse, a low whisper. It wasn't words, but a moaning hum coming from between the walls. I backed toward the door and reached for my phone to call for help, but it was dead. The screen was black. I checked the cord. It was unplugged. I hadn't moved it. Just before 1 a.m., the casket creaked again. This time there was a faint cap fingernails brushing under the lid. Once then again, I froze, scared to even breathe. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, but eventually my legs forced movement. I backed into the corner near the lamp, crouching to make myself smaller. The tapping stopped. A heavy silence filled the room, every noise waiting. Then the light flickered once, twice. On the third flicker, I swear the shadows moved, not just shifting, but separating from the walls. The darkness gained weight, and I felt something standing behind me, unseen. I turned, but saw nothing. Shaking, I grabbed the chair and sat down. That's when I noticed the casket lid slightly ajar, cracked an inch or two. I got up slowly, eyes locked on the gap. Nothing emerged, no hand, no movement, but the room's pressure was unbearable, like a storm about to break. I tried to convince myself the lid wasn't always latched, but the whispering returned, clearer now, a muffled, wet rustling sound that crawled over my skin. I pressed my hand against the switch for the hallway lights. This time they came on, a warm yellow glow spilled across the carpet. Still, my legs wouldn't move. The thought of stepping out felt worse. The clock read 2:14 a.m., almost 4 hours left to endure. I had to choose, leave and never explain why, or stay and face whatever was in that room. I sank back into the chair, hoping to wait it out. Suddenly, the air chilled so fast I could see my breath. The lamp flickered one last time and died. Only the hallway light glowed beyond the door. The casket gave a soft click, the lid shut itself. I didn't move again for a long time. Eventually, I must have passed out from fear or exhaustion. When I woke, sunlight bled through frosted glass above the door. The casket was shut. Silence blanketed the room. The man returned just after 7 a.m. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded but lied. I didn't trust myself to speak. He handed me the rest of the money and locked the casket tight with a key from his coat. I left town 2 days later, taking a job stocking shelves in Dallas. I never told anyone about that night until now. But sometimes, when it's cold and quiet, I still hear the whispers if I sit too long. I never discovered why the body couldn't be left alone. The funeral home closed 6 months later, a family matter, they said. All I know is whatever I sat with that night wasn't asleep. I've worked at a cemetery for over 15 years now. My official title is Cemetery Operations Coordinator, but most people just call me the cemetery manager. My job involves a bit of everything: scheduling funerals, meeting grieving families, selling burial plots, and making sure every service goes smoothly from start to finish. It's not a job for everyone. You need patience, compassion, and a strong stomach. And sometimes you need to know when to keep certain things to yourself. This story happened about 4 years ago. I still remember it vividly because, out of all my years working in cemeteries, this was the only time I ever truly questioned what I saw and what I believed. A man named Antonio came into the office one Monday morning. He was in his early 30s, Hispanic, with kind eyes and a heavy accent. The kind of person you can tell has a good heart just from the few words. He wanted to buy a plot for his father, who was in hospice care. His father was terminally ill, and Antonio wanted to have everything ready in advance so his family wouldn't have to deal with the paperwork when the time came. As he sat across from me, he kept showing me photos on his phone, pictures of his dad from family gatherings, birthdays, barbecues. In every photo, the man looked happy and warm. Too young to be leaving the world. I could tell Antonio loved him deeply. And when he said, "I just want to make sure my father's spirit rests easy," I felt that in my chest. Unfortunately, his father passed away just a few days later. Antonio came back that Friday to finalize the arrangements. The funeral was scheduled for the next day. The day of the funeral, it rained like I hadn't seen in months. Thick sheets of water came down nonstop, lightning flashing in the distance, thunder rumbling every few minutes. Around here, people say that when it rains during a burial, it's a sign of good luck, that the heavens are welcoming the soul. I was standing under the front awning of our main office when the funeral procession arrived. The hearse pulled up first, followed by a small line of cars. In the second car, I saw Antonio behind the wheel. Even through the rain, I could see his red eyes. He waved. I waved back. When the time came, I followed them to the burial site in one of our pickup trucks. Part of my job is to oversee every funeral and make sure everything runs smoothly. The service itself went as expected. Emotional, quiet, respectful. A priest said a few words, the casket was lowered, and the family said their final goodbyes under a sea of umbrellas. When everyone left, I did what I always do, one last drive around the property before heading back to the office. It was close to 5 p.m., and the rain was still coming down hard. Our cemetery closes at 5:30, so I started making my final rounds. Most days, I just drive the perimeter, check for visitors, and make sure the gates can be locked without anyone left inside. As I drove past one of the older sections, something caught my eye. About 50 yards ahead, through the rain, I saw someone walking between the rows of tombstones. It was quick, just a shadowy figure, hurrying down one of the lanes before disappearing behind a hedge. At first, I thought it might have been a family member who stayed behind. I honked my horn to let them know we were closing soon, but the figure didn't reappear. So I parked the truck, grabbed my umbrella, and stepped out into the storm. The wind was cold. The rain felt like needles against my face as I made my way down the same path. I turned the corner where I'd last seen them, and there was no one. I scanned the area for a good 20 minutes, checked behind the hedge, between tombstones, even around a small maintenance shed nearby. Nothing, not a soul. By that point, I was soaked and irritated, so I gave up and went back to the office. Inside, I decided to check the security cameras just to make sure I hadn't missed someone. We have several cameras covering most of the grounds, and I pulled up the live feeds on the monitors behind my desk. But because of the storm, the footage was mostly useless. The rain blurred everything, and the low light made it almost impossible to make out details. Still, I sat there scanning the screens while finishing up paperwork, half watching, half listening to the sound of thunder outside. Then I heard it. The front door slammed shut. Not just a gust of wind, a loud, deliberate slam like someone had walked in or out. I froze for a second before standing up. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I walked into the lobby. The front door was closed, the lights flickering slightly from the storm. No one was there. Maybe someone had come in to ask for help and then left quickly? I checked the side hallway, the visitation room, even the restroom. All empty. That's when I walked back toward my desk and something outside the window caught my eye. Someone was standing there, directly outside, staring in at me. His face was pale, expressionless, his hair slicked down from the rain. I stumbled backward, my heart jumping to my throat. For a second, I couldn't even move. Then, as I looked closer, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I recognized him. It was Antonio's father. The same face from the photos Antonio had shown me just days earlier. Same mustache. Same kind eyes, only now they were empty. I blinked, and in that split second he was gone. I burst out of the office door, yelling, "Hey!" into the storm, spinning around to check the sides of the building. There was no one. No footprints in the mud. Nothing but the sound of rain pounding against the ground. I stood there for a few seconds, drenched, shaking, staring out at the empty cemetery. Then I did something I almost never do. I locked up early. I packed my things, shut down the monitors, locked the office doors, and drove out through the main gate. I opened it, pulled through, locked it again behind me, and sped off toward home. When I got home, my wife noticed I was quieter than usual. She asked what was wrong, and I just told her, "Long day?" That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying what I'd seen over and over in my head. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But the one thing that kept bothering me, the way he looked at me, he wasn't angry. He wasn't lost. He just looked sad, like he wanted something. For days afterward, I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, stress, or just a trick of the light through the rain. But every time I closed my eyes, I could still see him, that blank stare through the window pane. And the strange thing is, I never told Antonio. He still comes by sometimes to visit his father's grave. He always waves at me when he leaves, and I wave back, just like that rainy day. But every time he does, I can't help but wonder, the day of that storm, was his father really gone? Or was he waiting to say goodbye one last time? I still remember that night like it was yesterday. It was one of those jobs you don't forget no matter how long you've been in this line of work. I'd been working at the funeral home for a few years by then, used to the silence and the stillness, to the smells and the somber faces. But this one was different. The call came in late afternoon. A young man, early 20s, had been the victim of a brutal attack. The police were done with the scene, and now it was up to us to prepare him for his final goodbye. His name was Michael. I didn't know him, never met him, but somehow it felt like I should. Maybe because his story was etched into every inch of that quiet room. Preparing a body is usually straightforward clinical, in a way. You wash, dress, and do your best to make the person look peaceful again. But with Michael, the room felt different the moment I stepped in. Cold. Not just the chill the refrigeration unit gave off, but a deep, bone-deep cold that wrapped around you like a wet blanket. It was unsettling. I'd been doing this long enough to expect some weirdness. Ghost stories are as common in funeral homes as flowers, but this was raw and close, like being caught in a sudden storm. My breath fogged in front of me, and I found myself pulling my jacket tighter, even though the thermostat said things were fine. I started gently, cleaning Michael's face first. His skin was pale, but oddly warm, like he'd just fallen asleep, not met a violent end. His eyes remained closed, and I couldn't help but notice the faint bruising, the anger held in those quiet marks. They told a story I never wanted to hear. As I worked, I heard soft whispers or maybe just the hum of the ventilation system. My eyes flicked to the corner, but there was nothing there. The feeling of not being alone grew stronger. Then, out of nowhere, I swore I heard a voice. Clear, low, and trembling like someone calling out in the dark. It wasn't from the radio or the funeral home office. It felt like it came from Michael himself. Chilling, almost pleading. I blinked, and the room fell silent again. Maybe it was my imagination. I hoped it was. After finishing the embalming rites, I dressed him in a crisp white shirt and dark jacket, the kind his younger brothers might have picked out. I'd heard they were coming to say goodbye. 2 boys, barely teenagers, left behind by something none of us should ever have to endure. As I closed the casket lid, I felt that cold again, sharper this time. My fingers froze on the latch. I swear for a moment I could see something flicker behind the closed lid, like a shadow moving or a tear on the edge of time. Later, when Michael's brothers arrived, their grief hit the room like thunder. They barely spoke, clinging to each other as if to stop the world from twisting further. I saw the way their eyes searched the closed casket as if trying to reach Michael through the wood. One of them, the older boy, paused and whispered something so soft I almost missed it. "Tell him we'll be all right." His voice cracked like dry branches in winter. I left that night shaken in a way no ghost story ever shook me. There was a heaviness in the air, a silence that was louder than any noise. Sometimes grief is a presence as real as flesh. In the days that followed, I kept thinking back to the funeral home that night. The cold that wasn't cold, the whisper that wasn't just sound. The profound sense that even in death, Michael was still trying to protect his brothers, or maybe just asking us to keep his memory alive. It's the kind of haunting that stays with you, not the scary stuff, but the quiet kind that makes you human.